They thought that if they made really good milk and if they had a good distributor like Organic Valley or Horizon, which are the two main organic distributors here, and if they kept their cost really low and did most of their own labor, they would be successful. And as you heard Paul, success for them is just simply breaking even and being able to hold on to the farm, to be able to live a life on the farm with the whole family, and then to pass it on to their children later. Well, what they found is that that didn't work, and that in the short term, a farm is a losing proposition, and that a successful farm is not just a year or 5 years, it's really a generation or longer. It takes that long to really balance out the good years and the bad years. What they've done since then, though, is really kind of interesting. At this point in time, they were feeding their cows grain. Now, most cows in most industrial dairies are fed corn along with antibiotics and various vitamins. And most cows today are bred to be able to eat that diet. But cows actually are pasture animals. In other words, they graze. And over the years, we've genetically taken the cow away from that and modified it so that it can survive on corn. What Paul and Phyllis have done is they have now, through a couple of generations, have raised their cows so that the cows are completely pasture based. In other words, they don't have to bring additional grain in. What they do is they let the cows out on their field to eat grass, and then during the summertime they mow hay to feed the cows during the wintertime. So what they've done is they've been able to get the herd onto a pasture-based system, which has reduced their cost a lot. In addition to that, what they're doing is they're selling the genetics of the herd to other farmers that are trying to do the same thing. And they're using the internet to market that. In addition to that, what they're doing is they work as consultants to a lot of farmers that are trying to do something similar to what they're doing, and they also teach in a number of the agricultural schools around in the area. They've also now moved away from the model that they started with, and they sell most of their milk to a creamery upstate that makes yogurt. It's fantastic yogurt. But then they also sell to Horizon and to Organic Valley. Now, what I find interesting about their current model is that they realized early on that farming is extremely risky. And if you have all of your possibilities tied up with one distributor, you're going to fail because you're beholden to milk prices and all the other things that are happening within the market. So what they've done is they now sell their milk to two distributors, plus they're getting the majority of their milk is being sold as yogurt. And in addition to that, they're selling genetics, they're teaching, they're speaking. And so what they did is they took essentially a 19th century artisanal model and they've turned it into a 21st century diversified business that is all based on internet sales. So they're still going. Yeah, I'm still in touch with them.
Sounds like a sequel in the making.
Yeah, possibly.
Could be. Speaking of this film, were you looking for a story on farming, or was this something that sort of just fell into your lap, and you just sort of had to pursue it?
Well,
your interest?
yeah, I'm a producer by trade, and all of the work that I've done up until this film has been feature-length films, primarily independent, some studio. And actually, I wasn't even thinking of directing because I'm very happy in my day job, so to speak. But this kind of documentary is actually something that brought me to New York 35 years ago. The style of filmmaking is called cinema verite, which is kind of a fly-on-the-wall approach. And in this style of filmmaking, the filmmaker tries to remove themselves as much as possible from the film, as opposed to, let's say, a Michael Moore documentary, where Michael is very, very much part of the way that story is being told. What I love about this style of filmmaking is that you really let the people come through. It's almost as if this kind of documentary is as close to a fiction film as you can get, with it still being true. And that's a style of documentary filmmaking that I've loved ever since I came to New York. So I've known Paul and Phyllis for, quite some time now. Paul, before he was became a farmer, was a carpenter and construction contractor, and actually did a lot of work for me and my wife on a house that we have upstate. And Phyllis was working as an occupational therapist out of Albany. And what happened is Paul came to do some work for us, and he and I he would arrive before the crew would, and he and I would sit down and have a cup of coffee in the morning, and would start talking. And before you knew it, it was 6 o'clock and ready for them to go home. So we became friends pretty quickly. They were having dinner over at our house one night, and they told us that they had bought a farm, that it was about an hour and a half from where we were, about an hour due west of Albany, and that they were going to become full-time farmers. And my wife and I thought, well, that's insane. I mean, if just look around, every farm in every one of these little towns in upstate New York is going out of business. They're selling, they have for sale signs up, and one farm after another is being turned into some kind of a development for homes or shopping centers or golf courses. And just the value of the real estate alone makes farming kind of a losing proposition. So anyway, they are, as you can tell, they're very stubborn. And they said, no, that's what we're going to do. And we gave him our blessing. And the next morning, my wife said, that would make an interesting movie. And I started thinking about it. And I knew that Paul and Phyllis were very dynamic individuals. They're very strong. The relationship they have, the marriage that they have, I think is quite unique in that they're really great partners. And they're very articulate, and they're very well read. And so I thought about it, and I thought, okay, well, starting any endeavor is going to be, there's going to be a source of conflict there. And the fact that they're starting a farm means that most of the work is going to be outside. And wouldn't it be interesting to structure a film around the 4 seasons of the year? And then I started thinking, well, the other thing that would be really interesting is that, there's a lot of discussion now about where our food comes from and about small farms and sustainability. Farming is very much in the news. It's very much in politics. It's very much on our minds. And I thought, well, if I did this as a cinema verite film, what the film would become is an opportunity to take an audience and put them in Paul and Phyllis's world, to experience what it means to be a farmer today. And so I called them up and I said, guys, would you mind if I came and hung out for a year? And they said no, after thinking about it for a couple of days. And 8 days later, I was there on the farm on the day they moved in. And at the end of that week, we were up filming the picnic scene. And I found out, along with everybody in the audience, that Phyllis was pregnant. And I thought, oh, that's going to be interesting. But so, this was something that really kind of came to me through, it was like in my backyard. And then all of a sudden I thought, oh, that's going to be interesting. What I didn't know is it was going to take 5 years to make. So
yeah, I am actually also a very big fan of cinema verite. I saw the special thanks to Al Maisels, who, if the audience doesn't know, is one of the forefathers of cinema verite, or as the U.S. often refers to it as direct cinema, director of Grey Gardens and Salesman, a handful of other wonderful documentaries. One of the tricky things with cinema verite is it's risky because you never know where your subjects are going to end up, where your story is going to end up. Did you find this film at any particular point shifting in storyline direction where you sort of had to modify or adjust your initial thinking as to how the story was going to unfold?
Well, what my plan was I in early days when I was just got out of college, I worked as a photojournalist for a while, and what I learned as a photojournalist, when you're doing long-term stories, is the best way to work is to go into the situation and simply shoot anything that's interesting. You shoot, and then you come back and you look at your contact sheets, and over a period of time, the story starts to unfold. So what I wanted to do is exactly that. I wanted to approach it in the same way, and I, as a filmmaker, tend to overthink things and to over-research and to over-plan, which actually for a producer is great. For a director, it could be a disaster. So the style of filmmaking really suited because it meant that I was being pushed to a direction that I'm not really comfortable in, which is simply showing up with a camera and waiting for something to happen with absolutely no planning. Because also with the style, I really didn't ask them to do anything. And basically it was just, we set a couple of rules in the very beginning, which was that I'm just going to be there and I'm going to film. As a matter of fact, the way this was shot is I came up with a sound system where I put one mic on Paul and one mic on Phyllis, and I had a mic on the camera, and I had a small mixing panel on my chest that I was able to adjust levels, and it was just me. There was no sound man, there were no assistants. And I think that helped add to the intimacy that you feel in the film because there's really nobody else around. And which worked out really great because the indoor spaces were really tight as well. But we had a rule, which was when I put the camera on my shoulder, I disappear. And it was a game we played with the kids. And also I said, you guys are going to do what you're going to do, I'll do what I'll do, and we'll just be like two trains running side by side. And the only time we'll break that is if you see me getting ready to get into trouble by falling over something, or if I see you getting ready to do something that you'll get hurt. And within about 48 hours, it was amazing. It was just, they completely ignored me. And what I found also was that when people came over, they would ignore me as well because Paul and Phyllis were ignoring me. And if you look for the most part at the movie, there's only one scene that's shot with a long lens. Everything else is pretty much, I'm this far away as we're filming. So what would happen is for the first 8 months, I spent a week with them, and then I would go home for a week, and then come back in a week with them, go home for a week. And I would get up in the morning, so I was usually there, you know, outside before Paul got up or before Phyllis got up, and I would just hang out, and I would film. And if anything looked interesting, I would turn the camera on, and then follow it through to its completion. Now, the problem with that is I'm doing this, and I have no idea whether what I'm getting is any good or not. I mean, how many times can you film somebody milking a cow? It's really boring. But the other thing that I was really interested in doing is to see whether or not I could make a movie where the drama came out of the day-to-day details of these two people's lives. In other words, you know, I knew that there wasn't going to be probably no tornadoes would come through, and the law wouldn't come and foreclose on the property. I mean, nothing that would be in a Hollywood movie. So the drama was going to really come out of, can we pay our bills this month? Or I'm really tired. Or, you know, the cows got out. The little things that happen in all of our lives when we're trying to do some kind of an endeavor. And I knew that that was going to happen because the very nature of these two people trying to start something as difficult as a dairy farm, the very nature of it means that they're going to fail. they're going to be up against an enormous amount of conflict. So basically, that's what I did, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to do any interviews because I want this to be straight cinema verite. And then I thought, once I finish shooting, if I need the interviews, I can go back, which was the idea. But what happened is I stayed for 8 months, and there was never a conclusion. In other words, at the end of the 8 months, they had got the farm up and running, but who knew what was going to happen? There was no ending. There was a beginning and there was a middle, but that was about it. So I went off and did a movie and then came back, and for 3 years I would kind of check in with them. And most of the winter stuff, for instance, was just shot a year ago over Christmas break. So I'd come in and do the landscapes, and I started conducting interviews with Paul and Phyllis. And they, at that point in time, had about a year perspective on the project. So Paul was actually the voiceover that you hear with Paul narrating what's going on was actually shot about the summer after most of the film that you see. And at that point in time, he was really doubtful that they were going to be able to keep going. So his voice was very quiet, very dramatic. So after about 3 years of doing that, I thought, you know, if I don't sit down and start editing this stuff, I'm going to really lose interest because I've had it with this movie.
About how many hours had you shot by that point?
We had about 120 hours at that point in time. So I put a editing room and an editor together, and we started working on it. And the idea was, let's just put this together. Anything that's interesting, let's put it in the film, you know, and let's go ahead and put it in continuity, and then we'll start working on it. And then if we need to, we'll go get additional material. And at that point, as we got further and further down, I saw a Thin Red Line, which is the Terrence Malick movie about the what was it, the war in the Philippines, Korean War, Guadalcanal, about Guadalcanal. And it's interesting because if you look at that movie, Malick is using a lot of voiceover that is as if it's in the character's head. And I thought, you know, most documentaries, they have a style where you always see somebody being interviewed and then you can go off from there on a voiceover. Or you start on the voiceover and you end up with somebody being interviewed. And I thought, well, if Malick could do it, let's give it a try. You know, let's take Paul's voice and completely remove it from any kind of interview situation and let his voice be just the essence of what the problem is. And so we started with a lot of voiceover, and then we kept paring it back and paring it back and paring it back until what you see in the film right now. I forgot what your question was. I'm sorry.
It really was just, I think you answered it and answered a couple other questions I had on my mind.
Anyway, I think I remember. So
it was finding the story.
Yeah. So the biggest problem in the film is that there is no ending, or there was no ending, and I kept, you know, trying to. I broke my rule, and I kept going to Paul and Phyllis and trying to come up with some kind of an ending. Well, Paul, what if you got everybody in the family together? Because their family felt some of the family felt very differently than they did about what their choices were. So I figured if I could get the whole family in, well, that would be pretty raucous, and that might make a good ending. But they wouldn't do it. You know, they kept saying, oh, that's a great idea. And then, of course, they would shy away from it. So we're in the cutting room. We've got a middle, a beginning, we have a middle, we have these two great personalities, but there's no ending to the movie. And I started thinking, okay, you know, movie endings or story endings are events. Some event happens, and we don't have that event. Well, why is an event important? Well, an event in a movie or a story is important because what happens when that event takes place is the characters have an emotional response. So I thought, well, why don't we have an emotional response? We don't have an event, but it doesn't mean that we can't create that emotional response. So we started playing around with a number of different things, and you'll see in the end, the last act is they break even, and we're doing as well as our neighbors. And the end of the movie comes when Paul comes out and he starts talking again about if we could only just break even, we want to make this work. And then we cut to the storm footage, and at that point in time, the audience is probably thinking, "Oh my God, did they abandon the project?" Because that farm looks pretty deserted. But then Paul comes back on. Well, you see Oliver there, and then Paul comes back and talks about the frustration and the realization that this is what it means to be a farmer, and decides right there that I know how hard it is to be a farmer. I know the sacrifice of what it means to be a farmer. But we're going to try again. We're going to keep going. I'm going to accept that, and we're going to keep going. And then that's the end of the movie. And then that's the business part, but then we put the sledding scene afterwards, which in a lot of ways is the culmination of all their dreams of having this life and sharing this life with their children. And that's the family part.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I'd love it if any of the audience had questions. Chile? Yeah, sure.
It seems like there are some kind of profoundly unspoken policy implications in your film, just in relation to the discourse that's going on in this country right now, vis-a-vis, the government's support for small business and, agriculture in particular, with the Farm Bill being debated in Congress right now. I was just wondering, given the kind of length that it took you to make the film, whether it was your initial intention to contribute to that discourse, or if that was something that kind of emerged serendipitously in the editing process.
Well, my wife is very interested in the slow food movement, the sustainability movement, the agrarian movement. I mean, these are all movements that tie into where we're headed with our food, local food. And we talk about it a lot. And Paul and Phyllis are very, very into the agrarian movement, which is about taking control of your life, going back to the land, growing your own food, raising your family, and being very much part of your community. What I was interested in the film, and as a matter of fact, somebody on the very first screening said, what was your intention? Which is similar to what I think your question is. Because, a lot of the issues that are coming up right now or that are being debated right now were still very much a part of the political climate when I started making this. When the person said, "What's your intention?" I said, well, my intention was I wanted to put a face on the small farmer because I think that where movies work best is in creating an emotional environment that we as an audience experience. So if I can do that, then the next time you pick up a newspaper and read about the Farm Bill, you'll actually, you'll know somebody that's affected. The truth of the matter is that when I decided to make the movie, I made it because I thought they were really interesting characters. I thought they were both very photogenic. I thought that it was a built-in dramatic situation with the 4 seasons, could correlate to the 4 acts with an introduction. I thought about it as a storyteller, and I think that I chose the project because I thought it would make a great story. At the time, I felt that what it would also do is it would resonate in a big way. And it would resonate not just because of the issues that we're talking about right now, but because I think that farms, and especially small farms like what Paul and Phyllis have been a part of the American cultural landscape, if you will, from the very beginning. You go back and take a look at Thomas Jefferson, for instance, and Jefferson was talking about how what this country should be would be a land of yeoman farmers, where everybody owned and was responsible for part of the land. And if you look throughout history, the small farm has become an icon of whatever's going on in the time. If you take a look at some of the most amazing photographs that Walker Evans and the other photographers took during the Great Depression, where these iconic images of farms that are just wasted. Well, those are all small farms. And then again in the 60s and in the early 70s, which was kind of a back to land movement, farms took on this kind of this rosy, everything would be great if you went to the farm and worked and raised your children on the farm. So I knew that the small farm is iconic with what it means to be American. And I knew that what Paul and Phyllis were doing, which is basically a husband and wife deciding they want to be in control of their life. That's kind of the American dream, whether it's a small business or deli or whatever, small farm. Also, I felt that Paul and Phyllis embodied very, very traditional, I hate the word values, but American values. In other words, they truly believe that if you work really hard, if you save your money, if you focus on what it is that you're doing, you'll be successful. And at the heart of all of that, what's most important is the family. Now, those are very, very much iconic American values. And I thought, okay, well then this story has two really great characters, the potential for really interesting conflict, possibly very good visuals, and thematically, a very, very American story. Now, as we were putting it together, what we did purposefully was we scaled all of the political elements back. I mean, we have long, long interviews with Paul talking about, you know, how this country is going to hell in a handbasket, and, you know, 10 years from now, they're going to be in a great place because nobody will be able to afford food because oil is too expensive. And I mean, but we took all that out because it's a little too hard-edged. And I mean, if you sat down with Paul and had a beer, you know, he wouldn't seem to be a kook. But when you take that out of context and you put somebody up on the screen and they're talking that way, then they do seem a little odd. So we started taking all of that out. We also took out any mention of the agrarian movement, any mention of sustainability, any mention of organic. As a matter of fact, the word sustainability is only used once, which is in the very end. And at that point in time, it's not completely clear when Paul says that's not sustainable, whether or not he's talking about, you know, sustainability or just if you don't treat your cows and you can't keep going. And we did that on purpose because I think that those words are right now, and probably always have been, they're pretty hot topic. You know, they're push button words. And unless we're going to go into really explaining the situation and really in depth exploring those themes, I felt let's leave it out, because what I want to do is I want to pull the audience into their experience. I want the audience emotionally to experience what it means to be a small-time farmer, what it means to run your life based on your dream. All the other things are there. And then let the audience come out and talk about those things. Let the audience the next day when, you know, the news on the Farm Bill comes up, talk about those things. But I wanted it to have a broad of audience as possible. So whether you are, no matter what you think about, you know, climate control, organic farming, sustainability, any of that things, whether you're Republican, Democrat, whatever, it doesn't matter, you know, because you connect with these two people. So that was done intentionally. Well, thank you. I mean, maybe it's because I'm not a journalist and I'm not a documentary filmmaker. I'm a fictional filmmaker making a documentary. So maybe it's because of that. But I believe that, and you know, you can pull out hundreds of examples that'll prove me wrong. But I believe that movies work best, whether they're documentaries or whether they're narrative fiction or whatever. I think movies work best when they create emotional experiences for the audience. For me, what movies can do that nothing else does is it allows you to see the world through somebody else's eyes. And, that I think is just amazing. So that's what we set out to do.
Yes.
Well, the farmhands, for the most part, came and went. And I think the longest they had a farmhand was maybe 1 month. And there are a number of things that relate to your question. It's not just why we frame the farmhands out. It's not that, it's not just that why didn't we tell more of the story of the farmhands in the community and how much they were making or why they were coming to work. There are a number of those stories. For instance, we see one scene with Phyllis teaching her daughter Grace, numbers and how to tell time. Now, that would imply that Phyllis is homeschooling, which she is, but we don't go into that in any depth. And there are a number of those stories. And what it came down to is that the first cut of the movie was 6 hours long. And as we started pulling things out, some things we pulled out because there were stories there that never really went anywhere. One of them was the farmhands. A lot of the farmhands that were working with these guys were farmers that needed to make additional money, that were working at Walmart and going home and milking at night. And so they came and they worked for Paul and Phyllis to get a little bit of extra money. That was the story with most of them. But that story never really went anywhere. And so bit by bit, we took these extraneous, if you will, stories out, looking for, well, what's the main story? The movie right now is 85 minutes long, and which, quite frankly, I think it could be a little bit shorter, but I don't think it could be any longer. And the story is the story of them trying to get the farm off the ground and trying to make it work. So in the end, and we did this through a lot of different screenings, what we would do is we'd show the movie to a small audience of 3 or 4 people. And we'd say, okay, what didn't you like? What did you like? What was confusing? And what they would oftentimes say is, I want to hear more about the farmhands. And what we started realizing is that when they wanted to hear more about something, it meant that that storyline hadn't been developed enough. So we took it out. Looking to make it as strong, the one main story, as strong as possible.
Any other questions? No? Well, yes.
They don't. But, they had pigs. They raised a number of different things. They have the milk cows. They raised pigs that for meat that they were selling. They sold the veal, the calves. They also had beef cows that they sold for meat. They also had chickens. As a matter of fact, the scene where they're going over their bills and realize that they're $4,000 or $5,000 a month short, there were chickens back on the washing machine, and I didn't realize it at the time. But so when we looked at the scene, there was so much chicken noise that the only way we could get rid of it is add machine noise on top of it. So, but they also raised chickens. So when they started, they were doing a lot of different things, trying to make it work. And they also dropped the pigs. Paul hates pigs. So.
I was just wondering, if you could tell us what you're up to now, or if you have any projects in the works, producer-wise or director-wise, or any handle or aspirations, things you'd like to do.
That's Alan's way of saying time to bring it to a close. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm doing the festival route with the film, which I'll continue to do through the end of the year. And you can track us on Facebook. If you're a Facebook member, you can go to either my webpage or the first season. So we have a number of festivals in the fall. And in addition to that, I'm going to start teaching at NYU in the fall. I'm going to teach a producing seminar for 1 semester this coming semester. And then after that, there are a couple of feature projects later in January. But right now, I don't have any intention to make another documentary. It's too hard.
Was the experience or sort of pushed you away from directing
No.
altogether?
Well, no. As far as directing goes, I'm not really interested in directing because, I mean, I've had an opportunity as a producer to work with some amazing directors, and I could never, ever do what they do. But the documentary, that's an interesting, there may be another one down the line.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, guys.